There were darker undertones than any noir movie amid the glittering lights of Hollywood's golden age, the lavish premieres, the meticulously planned promotional shots, and the flawless on-screen romances. While viewers in America watched their favorite celebrities play lovers and heroes, few were aware that many of these same performers were battling severe addictions off-screen. Hollywood's brightest lights were frequently blazing at both ends during a time when PR departments worked endlessly to conceal their stars' afflictions and studio physicians administered drugs like candy. These were not only recreational indulgences or informal habits. These were crippling addictions that ultimately ruined marriages, professions, and, in many sad cases, lives. Today, we're revealing 15 iconic performers who battled addiction but were kept secret from their devoted fans for many years. These tales expose the terrible human cost behind the flawless images that are shown on American movie screens, from the adolescent starlet who was force-fed amphetamines by her studio to the daring hero whose body aged decades in a matter of years. From now on, you and Dad need to work together. Judy Garland was already struggling with an addiction that would follow her for the rest of her life when she skipped down the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz at the age of 16. An addiction that started as a result of studio mandate rather than personal preference. At the age of 13, MGM executives, who were worried about the young star's weight and rigorous work schedule, started giving her pep pills. As one former MGM employee described, they called her the girl with the golden voice, but she couldn't sleep without a pill or wake up without one, who worked at the studio throughout Garland's formative years. It wasn't offered as an option. Like dancing rehearsals or costume fittings, it was a requirement of her employment. Garland was prescribed Benzedrine, an early amphetamine, to help her stifle her hunger and give her the energy she required for demanding 18-hour workdays. Studio doctors prescribed barbiturates to calm her down when these stimulants eventually left her too wired to sleep. Garland's life would be defined by a cycle of ups and downs by the time she was in her mid-teens. Garland was subject to MGM's control over every element of her life, not just her medication. At the commissary, studio minders kept an eye on her food intake and occasionally took plates away from her in front of her. The combination of the medicine's physiological effects and psychological harm led to a perfect storm of dependency. The trend was well established by the time Garland was in her 20s. She started looking for medications outside of the studio system since she couldn't function without the chemicals her body had grown reliant on. Missed days on site and confrontations with directors resulted from her increasingly unpredictable behavior. When her addiction problems started to interfere with production schedules in 1950, MGM fired her because she had caused the situation. Devastating relapses and incredible comebacks characterized Garland's later career. She was nominated for an Academy Award for her outstanding performance in A Star is Born in 1954. Behind the scenes, however, her reliance on prescription drugs grew stronger. Judy Garland, 47, was discovered dead in her London toilet on June 22, 1969. An incompetent self-overdose of barbiturates was determined to be the cause by the coroner. At the ultimate cost, the girl who had once sung about somewhere over the rainbow had finally broken free from the chemical cycle that had dominated her life since she was a little child. You look stunning. Something really awesome. On movie, Errol Flynn personified swashbuckling adventure. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, he was one of Warner Brothers' most bankable stars thanks to his captivating appeal and virile vitality in roles like Captain Blood, Robin Hood, and innumerable other handsome heroes. But Flynn was fighting a different kind of struggle off-screen. One in opposition to dependence. That would eventually make him decades older than he was. As one director who collaborated with Flynn in his later years noted, Robin Hood on screen, but in real life, the bottle always won. In less than 10 years, he went from being the most attractive man in Hollywood to looking like his own father. Early in his career, Flynn's relationship with booze was seen as just another aspect of his roguish charm. His drinking skills became legendary in Hollywood. His rakish public persona was shaped by his capacity to drink copious amounts of alcohol and yet be able to work. However, what had begun as social drinking changed into something far more harmful as the years went by. According to reports, Flynn was drinking more than a quart of vodka every day by the middle of the 1940s. Knowing that Flynn wouldn't be able to give his finest performance by the afternoon, directors started scheduling important scenes early in the day. Flynn developed more dependencies as his drinking worsened. He started taking morphine for pain after getting malaria while traveling to New Guinea. What started out as legal medicinal use swiftly degenerated into addiction, much like many others who used opiates. When comparing Flynn's films across time, the visual evidence of this decrease is striking. The bloated, haggard man who makes his appearance in Too Much Too Soon, 1958, is a far cry from the lively athletic star of The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938. Even though she was only 49 when the latter was filmed. The condition of Flynn's physique astounded the medical examiner when he passed away in 1959 at the age of 50 from a heart attack. According to reports, the examiner said, "This man's organs show the deterioration we would expect in someone 30 years older." Flynn's body displayed several indications of the damage caused by years of substance addiction, including an enlarged heart and serious alcohol-related liver disease. Will you have the self-control to say no? Simply. 3. Self-destruction, drink, painkillers, and Montgomery Clift. Few performers from Hollywood's golden age have the intensity, sensitivity, and unadulterated skill that Montgomery Clift possessed. Clift introduced a new sort of masculine vulnerability to the screen with his haunted eyes and emotionally open performances in movies like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity. Strikingly different from the more stoic superstars who had ruled Hollywood in previous decades. One night in May 1956, however, Clift fell asleep behind the wheel after leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, irreversibly changing the course of his career in life. His matinee idol face was badly damaged in the ensuing automobile accident, necessitating significant cosmetic surgery and signaling the start of a dependence on painkillers that would characterize his later years. According to a biographer who has researched Clift's life and career, Hollywood's most sensitive star turned into its most troubled. In addition to changing his looks, the event had a profound impact on how he related to his own body and psyche. Although Clift had a history of heavy drinking and substance experimentation before the accident, acquaintances said his use was social and somewhat managed. These casual habits became urgent dependence as a result of the crash's physical and psychological devastation. Devastated by the changes to his appearance and in excruciating pain from his injuries, Clift started using a risky mix of booze and medications to get through each day. Clift's career and health suffered greatly as a result. He became more and more unreliable on movie sets, occasionally losing his lines or unable to stay awake during pivotal parts. Once eager to collaborate with one of Hollywood's most talented performers, directors were now hesitant to employ him because they were worried about whether he would be able to finish a production without any problems. One of Clift's closest friends until his passing, Elizabeth Taylor, watched his decline with increasing dismay. She supposedly called him the Walking Dead when they collaborated on Suddenly last summer in 1959, 3 years after his accident. Clift was 45 when he was discovered dead in his bedroom in New York on July 23, 1966. Although a heart attack was cited as the official cause, everyone who had known him in his latter years could see the underlying causes. After 10 years of substance usage after the accident, his body had just given out. Putting on cosmetics, followed by a grunt. Bela Lugosi, morphine, and methadone. In the 1931 Universal horror classic, Bela Lugosi played Count Dracula, creating one of the most recognizable characters in film history. Lugosi set the standard for movie vampires that would shape popular culture for decades with his mesmerizing gaze and Hungarian accent when he said the timeless phrase, "Don't drink wine." However, beneath the cloak and elaborate clothing was a guy suffering from an addiction that would eventually prove to be just as terrible as any fictional monster. The actor who portrayed Dracula, ruined by a true addiction, was seen by a horror film historian. The idea that Lugosi, who played a character who required blood to survive, developed a morphine addiction in order to function in his day-to-day existence is a horrifying irony. Like many others in that time period, Lugosi's journey to addiction started with appropriate medical care. In the 1930s, Lugosi suffered from sciatica, a painful ailment affecting the sciatic nerve that travels from the lower back down the legs, while playing physically taxing parts in a number of horror movies. At a time when the addictive risk of opiates was either intentionally minimized or poorly understood, doctors frequently prescribed morphine to treat pain. What started off as pain relief soon turned into a dependency. Lugosi began injecting morphine on a regular basis during the late 1930s, not only to manage his sciatica but also to enable him to carry on with his everyday activities. His dosage and frequency rose in tandem with his tolerance, following the well-known pattern of growing dependency that ultimately took over his life. According to a medical historian who has researched addiction in the entertainment sector, Lugosi was among the first Hollywood celebrities to openly admit his addiction and seek treatment, making his case especially noteworthy. Lugosi's choice to enter a rehabilitation center in 1955 was both out of the ordinary and brave during a period when substance abuse was mainly seen as a moral failing rather than a medical illness. Lugosi was switched from morphine to methadone, a synthetic opioid created in Germany and being tested as an opiate addiction treatment during his treatment. Decades before methadone maintenance would be widely used, this made him one of the first patients in what would later become a routine procedure for opioid use disorder. Even with this groundbreaking treatment, Lugosi's years of addiction had permanently harmed his career. He had been reduced to little parts in caricatures of his old character, which culminated in his collaboration with filmmaker Ed Wood on pictures that are today regarded as some of the worst ever produced. He had formerly been a leading guy who commanded high salary. Lugosi was buried at his wish wearing one of his Dracula capes from his movies when he passed away from a heart attack in August 1956 at the age of 73. This served as a moving reminder of the part that had both made him famous and so completely typecast him that it limited his prospects for a subsequent career. 5. Alcohol, cocaine, Tallulah Bankhead, and everything she could snort. Tallulah Bankhead broke all the rules of her time. She established herself as one of the most unrestrained figures in entertainment thanks to her deep voice, sexual candor, and witty banter. Bankhead made outlandish behavior her brand, saying, "I'm as pure as the driven slush," in contrast to many Golden Age Hollywood stars who strived to maintain immaculate public personas. And leading a life that supported this bold assertion. Even in a field where indulgences are common, Bankhead's substance abuse distinguished out among her many excesses. Bankhead was extremely candid about her habits, especially her love of cocaine, which she used publicly at parties and occasionally even on business engagements, in contrast to celebrities who kept their addictions a secret. According to a theatrical historian who has researched Bankhead's career, the place is well known for its wild parties and candid interviews. She supposedly stated once that cocaine does not lead to habit formation. "I ought to be aware. For years, I have been taking it." Regardless of whether that comment is mythical or genuine, it sums up her careless attitude toward drugs that were killing off many of her peers. Bankhead used cocaine extensively and for a long time. She started using the drug in the 1920s, when it was still legal and reasonably available, and she kept using it well into the 1950s, when the penalties had significantly increased. According to friends, she kept cocaine in a silver box and would amiably serve it to guests as if they were after-dinner mints, apparently oblivious to the social or legal repercussions. Cocaine and alcohol combined to create a hazardous stimulant-depressant combination that has killed countless users. According to reports, Bankhead liked bourbon and drank more of it in the evening after consuming it during the day. Alcohol to calm her down and cocaine to boost her energy levels combined to produce a vicious cycle of fabricated highs and lows that progressively damaged her health and dependability at work. There were serious repercussions on the professional front. Despite having exceptional talent, Bankhead's performance in Hitchcock's 1944 film Lifeboat shows off her remarkable acting prowess. Her chances in Hollywood were hampered by her reputation for being untrustworthy. Because of her habits, studio executives were hesitant to fund projects with an actress who might not always be prepared for work. Malnutrition and emphysema were mentioned as contributing factors to pneumonia, which was the official cause of death for Bankhead, who passed away in December 1968 at the age of 66. Although her substance usage was not included on her death certificate, her friends and family knew that decades of cocaine, alcohol, and other intoxicants had reduced her body's defenses against the last sickness. An inch of clinging flour and water mixture. 6. Keaton Buster alcoholism. Buster Keaton's death-defying stunts and stony-faced emotions throughout the silent-to-sound transition made him one of the most influential pioneers of silent cinema. In addition to his physical bravery, movies like The General and Sherlock Jr. demonstrated his groundbreaking use of technology and visual narrative. However, after losing his artistic independence, this bright creative mind descended into a spiral of drunkenness, a decline that was closely associated with one of Hollywood's main times of upheaval. A film historian who specialized in silent movies watched the big stone face, silently eroding behind the curtain. It was not only a personal sorrow that led to Keaton's decline into alcoholism. It was a prime example of how Hollywood's most gifted creators may be destroyed by the expansion of its financial model. In 1928, Keaton's problems started. When he signed with MGM, which he would later describe as the worst decision of his career. Keaton had previously worked alone and had total creative control over his movies. He was reduced to the status of another contract actor under the MGM system, compelled to adhere to rules and guidelines that frequently overlooked his distinct comic talent. The move from silent to sound films, the most important technological change in film history, occurred at the same time as this loss of artistic authority. Even though Keaton had a nice speaking voice, the talkies drastically altered the speed and manner that had made his silent work so groundbreaking. Keaton's talent had been in solely visual comedy. Personal degradation swiftly followed the professional frustration. Throughout the 1920s, Keaton had been a moderate drinker, but as his MGM productions flopped both artistically and commercially, he started drinking excessively. What started off as a coping mechanism for career setbacks turned into a full-blown addiction. That had an impact on his marriage, career, and physical well-being. According to a film expert who has examined production logs from this era, Keaton was frequently seen on site inebriated by 1933. According to MGM records, he was repeatedly warned, suspended, and then fired by the studio because his drinking became more and more problematic. Keaton reached a low point in 1933. Following a particularly bad drinking session, he was admitted to a mental health facility. When he received a diagnosis of depression and drinking. His journey from independent filmmaker to disturbed studio employee to patient under constraints reached its lowest point with this temporary institutionalization. Keaton lived long enough to witness the start of a critical re-evaluation that would ultimately place him among the greatest filmmakers of all time before passing away from lung cancer in 1966 at the age of 70. But one of Hollywood's greatest creative tragedies is the years of his prime that were squandered to drunkenness. Marilyn Monroe is the one who has your approval. There are pills for everything. Marilyn Monroe is still the quintessential Hollywood star. Decades after her passing, her picture is still instantly identifiable. Over time, her impact on popular culture remained constant. But beneath the golden hair, flawless smile, and breathy voice was a lady entangled in a maze of prescription drugs that ultimately led to her premature death at age 36. The brightest star in Hollywood could hardly go between scenes. Was a makeup artist who collaborated with Monroe on a number of movies. In front of the camera was Marilyn the idol, and backstage was Norma Jean, who was frequently bewildered, nervous, and totally reliant on the medications she had been given that day. Early in her career, Monroe developed a relationship with prescription drugs, which grew more intense as her notoriety grew. Instead of treating core problems, studio physicians concentrated on maintaining the functionality of their valued asset. Prescribed barbiturates and tranquilizers to help her sleep and calm her anxiety, amphetamines to wake her up and keep her weight down, and a variety of other prescriptions to address the adverse effects of these main meds. According to a biographer who has researched Monroe's medical history, she frequently took amphetamines, barbiturates, and tranquilizers simultaneously. These were prescription drugs that were administered by doctors with minimal consideration for possible side effects or interactions. Monroe's dependence started to compromise her credibility as a professional by the late 1950s. Director Billy Wilder publicly battled her medicine use on the set of Some Like It Hot in 1959, which was directly linked to her inability to remember lines and frequent delays or absences. After her death, a photo of Monroe's medicine cabinet showed how dependent she was. Bottles of sedative hypnotic, Dexamyl, a combined amphetamine and barbiturate, Miltown, an anti-anxiety drug, Nambutal, a barbiturate, chloral hydrate, and many other prescription medications. This delicate pharmacological balancing act fell apart on August 4, 1962. Although Monroe was officially declared a probable suicide, many experts who have examined the case think her death may have been an accidental overdose, the tragic outcome of a confused woman trying to self-medicate with a dangerous combination of prescribed substances. Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home, with the coroner's report citing acute barbiturate poisoning as the cause of death. A man is such a piece of work. Alcoholism ate up Richard Burton's career. With his Shakespearean expertise and commanding presence, Richard Burton had one of the most exquisite voices in theatrical history. His delivery alone had the ability to elevate even bad material. His voice felt as much as heard, according to Elizabeth Taylor, his twice-wife and frequent co-star. However, this incredible tool and his once bright future were progressively ruined by an alcoholism so bad that it was hard to distinguish the actor from his addiction. According to a director who collaborated with Burton in the 1960s, he played monarchs and drank like one too. The extent of Richard's drinking was almost legendary, as though he treated booze with the same sense of epic that he infused into his performances. Growing up in Pontrydyfan, a Welsh mining community, Burton developed an alcohol addiction. There, drinking was ingrained in the society, and working men's social life revolved on the local pub. According to Burton's later recollections, he had his first drink at the age of 11, and by the time he reached adolescence, he had already begun to build up the tolerance that would eventually enable him to consume amounts of alcohol that would render regular drinkers unable. As Burton became one of the most well-known men in the world due to his relationship and repeated marriages to Elizabeth Taylor, his consumption had reached dangerously high levels by the middle of the 1960s. Burton was reportedly drinking 3 to 4 bottles of vodka a day during the height of his addiction, which is deadly for most people but necessary for basic functioning for his alcohol-adapted system. The effects on the body became more apparent. Once regarded as one of Hollywood's most attractive leading men, the handsome young actor began to look fat, with burst capillaries blemishing his once flawless face. The consequences of drink and smoke started to appear in his famed voice, which lost part of its resonance and had a scratchy tone that made it less beautiful. His addiction caused a great deal of stress in his personal life, especially in his relationship with Taylor. In 1974, their first marriage ended in divorce. Taylor was no longer able to watch Burton destroy himself. Even though they got married again in 1975, their reconciliation didn't last more than a year since Burton's drinking was still a major barrier. The medical examiner observed that Burton's body had substantial damage from decades of excessive alcohol usage when he passed away in 1984 at the age of 58 from a brain hemorrhage. His drinking history probably made the neurological problems that resulted in his catastrophic brain hemorrhage worse, and his liver was seriously damaged. For example, I might lose out on the 110th film if I make a mistake. LSD, alcohol, marijuana, and Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum developed an unflappable cool on-screen persona as the tough guy with the heavy lids who seemed unfazed by the chaos around him. There was some performance in this screen image. Mitchum showed a similar disrespect for authority and tradition in his off-screen life, especially with regard to recreational drugs. A film historian who has researched Mitchum's influence on American cinema said, "He made rebellion cool, even when it nearly killed him." Mitchum wasn't merely disobeying the law. He was wondering why the rules were in place at all. At the height of his early fame, Mitchum had his most well-known run-in with the law in 1948 when he was taken into custody during a marijuana raid at a house in the Hollywood Hills. The arrest was noteworthy as a cultural event as well as for Mitchum personally. One of the earliest well-known cannabis cases involving a big-name actor. According to a legal historian who specializes in drug enforcement, being arrested in a marijuana sting in 1948 was uncommon at the time. In post-war America, such an arrest was shocking, but it would hardly make the news today. Propaganda such as reefer madness greatly impacted the narrative surrounding marijuana, which portrayed it as a dangerous drug that caused moral decay and violence. As usual, Mitchum responded to the arrest with a casual demeanor. Rather than issuing tearful apologies or claiming entrapment, he maintained his cool demeanor throughout the process, even joking to reporters, "This is like being caught in a brothel reading the Bible." When asked about potential damage to his career, he shrugged and said, "I'd been in worse spots than this." The legal consequences were significant, but not career-ending. Mitchum served 43 days at a prison farm before being released. Remarkably, RKO Pictures, his studio at the time, stood by him. A decision that proved financially sound when his first post-prison film, Rachel and the Stranger, became a major hit. In later interviews, Mitchum was refreshingly honest about his marijuana use. "I'd been smoking since I was 15. What's the big deal?" he told one reporter in the 1970s. Decades before such candor about cannabis was common among celebrities. This matter-of-fact attitude extended to his other substance use as well. Mitchum was open about his alcohol consumption and in the 1960s his experimentation with LSD and other psychedelics. Mitchum's case stands apart from many others on our list because his substance use, while significant, never seemed to control him the way addiction controlled many of his contemporaries. His relationship with marijuana, alcohol, and other drugs reflected his overall philosophy toward life, a blend of hedonism, fatalism, and a fundamental disregard for external approval. Mr. Packet. I want 10. Jean Harlow. Pills and possible alcoholism. Jean Harlow blazed across Hollywood's firmament like a brilliant comet. The original blonde bombshell whose platinum hair, sensual screen presence, and unapologetic sexuality made her MGM's biggest female star in the early 1930s. Her death at the age of 26 cut short what promised to be one of the most significant careers in film history and has led to decades of speculation about the role that substance use may have played in her premature demise. The platinum blonde bombshell, burned out before 30, observed a film historian specializing in pre-code Hollywood. Harlow's short life represented both the glamour and the darkness of the studio system. The effects on the body became more apparent. Once regarded as one of Hollywood's most attractive leading men, the handsome young actor began to look fat, with burst capillaries blemishing his once flawless face. The consequences of drink and smoke started to appear in his famed voice, which lost part of its resonance and had a scratchy tone that made it less beautiful. His addiction caused a great deal of stress in his personal life, especially in his relationship with Taylor. In 1974, their first marriage ended in divorce. Taylor was no longer able to watch Burton destroy himself. Even though they got married again in 1975, their reconciliation didn't last more than a year since Burton's drinking was still a major barrier. The medical examiner observed that Burton's body had substantial damage from decades of excessive alcohol usage when he passed away in 1984 at the age of 58 from a brain hemorrhage. His drinking history probably made the neurological problems that resulted in his catastrophic brain hemorrhage worse, and his liver was seriously damaged. For example, I might lose out on the 110th film if I make a mistake. LSD, alcohol, marijuana, and Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum developed an unflappable cool on-screen persona as the tough guy with the heavy lids who seemed unfazed by the chaos around him. There was some performance in this screen image. Mitchum showed a similar disrespect for authority and tradition in his off-screen life, especially with regard to recreational drugs. A film historian who has researched Mitchum's influence on American cinema said, "He made rebellion cool, even when it nearly killed him." Mitchum wasn't merely disobeying the law. He was wondering why the rules were in place at all. At the height of his early fame, Mitchum had his most well-known run-in with the law in 1948 when he was taken into custody during a marijuana raid at a house in the Hollywood Hills. The arrest was noteworthy as a cultural event as well as for Mitchum personally. One of the earliest well-known cannabis cases involving a big-name actor. According to a legal historian who specializes in drug enforcement, being arrested in a marijuana sting in 1948 was uncommon at the time. In post-war America, such an arrest was shocking, but it would hardly make the news today. Propaganda such as reefer madness greatly impacted the narrative surrounding marijuana, which portrayed it as a dangerous drug that caused moral decay and violence. As usual, Mitchum responded to the arrest with a casual demeanor. Rather than issuing tearful apologies or claiming entrapment, he maintained his cool demeanor throughout the process, even joking to reporters, "This is like being caught in a brothel reading the Bible." When asked about potential damage to his career, he shrugged and said, "I'd been in worse spots than this." The legal consequences were significant, but not career-ending. Mitchum served 43 days at a prison farm before being released. Remarkably, RKO Pictures, his studio at the time, stood by him. A decision that proved financially sound when his first post-prison film, Rachel and the Stranger, became a major hit. In later interviews, Mitchum was refreshingly honest about his marijuana use. "I'd been smoking since I was 15. What's the big deal?" he told one reporter in the 1970s. decades before such candor about cannabis was common among celebrities. This matter-of-fact attitude extended to his other substance use as well. Mitchum was open about his alcohol consumption and in the 1960s his experimentation with LSD and other psychedelics. Mitchum's case stands apart from many others on our list because his substance use, while significant, never seemed to control him the way addiction controlled many of his contemporaries. His relationship with marijuana, alcohol, and other drugs reflected his overall philosophy toward life, a blend of hedonism, fatalism, and a fundamental disregard for external approval. Mr. Packet. I want 10. Jean Harlow. Pills and possible alcoholism. Jean Harlow blazed across Hollywood's firmament like a brilliant comet. The original blonde bombshell whose platinum hair, sensual screen presence, and unapologetic sexuality made her MGM's biggest female star in the early 1930s. Her death at the age of 26 cut short what promised to be one of the most significant careers in film history and has led to decades of speculation about the role that substance use may have played in her premature demise. The platinum blonde bombshell, burned out before 30, observed a film historian specializing in pre-code Hollywood. Harlow's short life represented both the glamour and the darkness of the studio system. A young woman who lived fast, worked even faster, and died before anyone could intervene effectively. Harlow's interaction with narcotics must be understood in the perspective of both her era and her medical background. Born in 1911, she came of age during Prohibition when alcohol usage held a certain rebellious cachet among the young and trendy. The repeal of Prohibition in 1933 coincided with her ascent to superstardom, and the harsh drinking culture of Depression-era Hollywood became part of her daily life. Studios strictly regulated her drug use, explained a researcher who has reviewed Harlow's medical records, but such control wasn't necessarily in her best interest. MGM's major priority was keeping its prized property operating, not addressing underlying health issues that would have required extended rest. By the mid-1930s, Harlow was experiencing major and recurring health difficulties. She suffered from influenza, throat infections, and exhaustion, ailments that studio doctors routinely managed with the prescription drugs available at the time. These possibly included early barbiturates for sleep, as Harlow's demanding work schedule often forced her to film during the day, then learn lines at night. Rumors of drunkenness began to circulate as Harlow's health problems grew. While some biographers have discounted these as overblown, contemporary testimonies from people close to her imply that Harlow did indeed turn to alcohol, particularly in the later years of her life when she was struggling with personal sadness and physical decline. The final chapter of Harlow's life began in May 1937 when she was filming Saratoga with Clark Gable. After several days of feeling more ill, she was finally seen by a doctor who found her in terrible condition. She was diagnosed with uremic poisoning, a form of kidney failure, and despite rapid medical care, died on June 7, 1937. Modern medical specialists who have analyzed the available evidence about Harlow's case think that her death reflected a perfect storm of events. An underlying renal illness, the nephrotoxic, kidney-damaging effects of several drugs and alcohol, the physical stress of her grueling work schedule, and the primitive state of medical knowledge about kidney disease in the 1930s. Could I advise that they appear equally culpable for the fight? What is tomorrow's moving picture? MGM conceals Spencer Tracy's covert alcoholism. On and off film, Spencer Tracy exuded a calm dignity and moral courage. His roles in movies like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Judgment at Nuremberg, and Boys Town exemplified a specific brand of American decency and direct honesty. However, beneath this outward display of composure and stability was a man who had battled alcoholism for his entire life, to the point where MGM hired a staff to control Tracy's drinking and avoid public outbursts. According to a cinema historian who has researched Tracy's work and personal life, America's most morally upright leading man was frequently too inebriated to talk. Of all the big stars in Hollywood's heyday, Tracy's disparity between his private life and his public persona was arguably the greatest. The primary symptom of Tracy's alcoholism was binge drinking as opposed to regular intake. He may stay clean for weeks or even months, especially while filming, but then he would go into days-long binge drinking. Tracy would frequently check into hotels under false pretenses, shut off communication with everyone but a select group of enablers, and drink until he was physically exhausted or ill enough to stop. To avoid public outbursts, the studio discreetly designated handlers, according to a former MGM employee who was aware of the arrangements. They were practically full-time minders whose job it was to prevent Tracy's drinking from getting known to the public and to make sure he showed up for set on time. They weren't only publicists or fixers. To control Tracy's condition, their handlers used a variety of techniques. They kept in touch with hotel employees across Los Angeles so they could be informed whenever Tracy arrived for a night out. They had money on hand to buy off possible witnesses to humiliating events. When Tracy's binges led to health issues that needed intervention, they collaborated with compassionate doctors who would treat her. The success of this arrangement was its most noteworthy feature. Tracy kept up his reputation as one of Hollywood's most reputable and trustworthy actors despite decades of serious alcoholism.